Every teacher, coach, or leader recognizes the moment. A capable learner pauses. Their effort slows. Their confidence seems to flicker. The task in front of them has not suddenly become impossible, but something inside them has changed. Pressure begins to build. Comparison creeps in. The risk of getting something wrong begins to feel bigger than the opportunity to get something right. What we often call disengagement is sometimes something very different. It is stress beginning to surface. And the important idea I want to explore today is this. Stress is rarely the problem. Stress is the signal. Stress is natural and necessary. Human beings are designed to experience stress. From an evolutionary perspective, the stress response is not a flaw in our system. It's one of our greatest survival tools. When we perceive threat or challenge, the body releases adrenaline and cortisol. Heart rate increases, attention sharpens, energy mobilizes. This is the body preparing for action. In its original context, this response helped humans run, fight, escape, or respond quickly to danger. In modern classrooms, sports fields, and workplaces, the physical danger may be gone, but the biological system is still there. Exams, performance evaluation, social comparison, fear of judgment. All of these can activate the same response. And when it's understood and channeled properly, this response can be incredibly useful. It can heighten focus, increase determination, support persistence, drive performance. In that sense, stress is not something we should always try to eliminate. It is something we need to learn to interpret. Problems begin when this natural activation has no clear outlet. Imagine a pressure cooker. Heat builds, energy builds. But if there's no release valve, pressure becomes dangerous. The same can happen psychologically. When individuals feel challenged but lack belief, when they feel pressure but lack control, when they feel evaluation but lack security, the stress response remains switched on. Instead of mobilizing action, it begins to create hesitation. Instead of sharpening focus, it narrows thinking. Instead of supporting performance, it undermines confidence. Over time, this can lead to avoidance, withdrawal, extreme perfectionism, low effort, emotional fatigue. These behaviors are often interpreted as attitudinal problems, but very often they're simply stress management strategies. Researchers such as Richard Lazarus demonstrated something very important. Stress is not simply about what is happening. It's about how individuals interpret what is happening. Stress increases when perceived demands exceed perceived resources. In other words, it is not just challenge that creates pressure. It is doubt about coping. The neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky makes a similar point. Animals experience stress in short bursts. Humans can experience it continuously because we anticipate, compare, and imagine. The psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi described how people thrive when challenge and skill grow together. But when challenge appears to outpace capability, anxiety begins to emerge. This helps explain why two students can sit in the same classroom and experience completely different emotional realities. In many schools, enormous effort goes into intervention programs, revision timetables, behavior systems, well-being initiatives. These are essential, but their effectiveness depends on whether they align with what students are actually experiencing internally. If we respond to visible stress without understanding its drivers, support can miss the mark. This is where behavioral insight becomes powerful. One of the most important shifts schools can make is moving from reacting to stress once it appears to recognizing the motivational patterns that make stress predictable. Patterns such as perfectionism, fear of failure, social comparison, low self-efficacy, and hopelessness. When these drivers sit beneath the surface, challenge can begin to feel like judgment. Effort becomes risky. Mistakes feel public. Belief starts to wobble. Insight profiling helps leaders and teachers see these patterns earlier at individual and cohort level. This allows messaging, support, and teaching approaches to be adjusted with far greater precision. Recently, I worked with a secondary school preparing higher maths groups for mock examinations. These were capable students, motivated students, students who cared deeply about their outcomes. But previous years had shown a pattern of rising anxiety, uneven performance, and occasional disengagement. Rather than waiting for stress to appear, the school wanted to understand what might be driving it. Students completed a short behavioral insight survey. The cohort profile showed strong intrinsic motivation and mastery orientation, but it also showed elevated perfectionism, fear of failure, and social comparison, alongside lower self-efficacy. In simple terms, these students cared a great deal, but were increasingly unsure whether they could succeed. Teachers adjusted messaging to emphasize process rather than comparison. Lessons began with achievable starter tasks to rebuild confidence. Assembly messages shifted from outcome imagery to reflection on effort and preparation. Parents were also supported to understand how well-intentioned pressure can increase anxiety. By the time the mocks arrived, something had changed. Students still experienced stress, but they understood it. And once stress is understood, it becomes far easier to manage. The results improved, but more importantly, the experience of learning improved. What becomes really important at this point is what schools actually do with this picture. Because understanding stress is valuable, but understanding alone doesn't change experience. Insight becomes transformative when it begins to shape the lived reality of pupils and staff. This is where leadership thinking needs to move from diagnosis to intentional system design. In our work with schools and partners, including recent collaboration around behavioral change models, we've been exploring that systematic, strategic response. This is the stage where insight is translated into structured action, not as a bolt-on intervention, but as a coherent review of how the school operates. There are three areas where this becomes especially powerful. First, leaders can begin to review the curriculum through the lens of engagement and stress. Not simply what is taught, but how challenge is experienced. Are success criteria visible and attainable? Is cognitive demand building confidence or quietly overwhelming working memory? Are there regular opportunities for mastery and progress, or are students repeatedly confronted with high-stakes performance moments? Even cultural messaging matters. Assemblies, tutor time themes, and everyday language all shape how students interpret pressure. If a cohort already shows high perfectionism or social comparison, repeated emphasis on outcomes can unintentionally increase threat. But when schools deliberately reinforce narratives of effort, improvement, and belonging, the emotional climate begins to shift. Stress is not removed, but it becomes more manageable. The second leadership response concerns how adults bring strategy to life. Insight should not sit as a data on a dashboard. It should influence everyday professional habits. Teachers need clarity about how different motivational profiles respond to challenge. Some students need early success experiences. Some need reassurance that mistakes are safe. Some need structured challenge to prevent quiet disengagement. When staff share a common understanding of these patterns, emotional guesswork reduces, confidence increases, consistency strengthens. Even small environmental cues can matter. Shared language in corridors, visual reminders in classrooms, timetabling adjustments where stress patterns are known. Leadership modeling becomes critical here. When leaders communicate clearly why changes are being made, staff are more likely to align their practice. Collective efficacy begins to grow. The third area is how schools evaluate whether change is actually being felt. Insight allows leaders to define what they are looking for, not simply improved data outcomes, but shifts in experience. Are students persisting longer during challenge? Are they taking more positive risks in their learning? Is avoidance behaviour reducing? Are classrooms characterised by calm challenge rather than quiet tension? Quality assurance becomes more purposeful when leaders know what success should look like. Lesson visits, pupil voice, behaviour patterns, and staff feedback all provide evidence. And importantly, this process needs to operate within a climate of high challenge and low threat. The aim is for professional learning, not judgment. When insight informs reflection rather than fear, something significant happens. Schools begin to function as coherent learning systems. When these elements align, curriculum experience, professional implementation, and leadership evaluation, stress is no longer left to chance. Students experience challenge that feels purposeful rather than overwhelming. Adults feel confident about how to respond. The emotional pressure within the system becomes regulated rather than reactive. In that sense, the real power of understanding stress lies not only in supporting individuals, it lies in shaping environments. Because stress doesn't exist only inside people, it exists in the interaction between people and the systems. And when systems become more intentional, stress returns to being useful. It becomes the signal that growth is happening, not the warning that breakdown is approaching. A final reflection. A system with no pressure produces little growth. A system with unmanaged pressure produces breakdown. The challenge for educators, coaches, and leaders is not to remove stress completely. It is to listen to what stress is telling us. Because stress is rarely random. It is often the signal that belief, identity, and interpretation are shaping how challenge is experienced. Understand those drivers and the pressure valve begins to open. Ignore them and the pressure simply builds. Stress isn't the enemy. Unexplained stress is.